Okay.
Well, we're sitting here at the 60-year celebration of coming to Canada for the Huisman, or shall I say Huisman,
Huisman.
family.
Close.
Um, well, Yvonne, why don't you tell us about before the trip was made, maybe what life was like in Holland?
Well, of course, we all went through the Second World War. And after that, there was not very much as far as jobs were concerned. And I did have three brothers who all eventually needed jobs. So my dad decided in 1952, we better go somewhere else where there's lots of opportunity. And that's the reason we came to Canada, because Canada is supposed to be a land of opportunity.
Do you know how he chose Canada? Was it like it was because it was
Well,
known as that?
actually, that's kind of funny. First, we were going to go to New Zealand, and we couldn't. It didn't seem to be the best place to go to because they were kind of cliquey, we were told, if you were not English.
Okay.
Then we were going to go to Australia, and that didn't work out. And then we were going to go to America, but you
Yeah.
had to have a sponsor, and
Okay.
we didn't know anybody in America.
Yeah.
So that left Canada. So we decided upon Canada because we knew people from our hometown who had immigrated to Edmonton, and they were willing to sponsor us, but only on paper. We had to make our own living because they didn't have any money to sponsor us, but they sponsored us on paper.
And what year was that?
1952. That was in 1952, yeah.
How old were you when?
I was 18, and I was in no hurry to move to Canada because I just had a boyfriend, and I had a good job. I worked as a bookkeeper at a granary, and that was a fun job, and I loved it. So I was in no hurry to move. But when you're 18 years old, everything becomes an adventure. To me, anyway. So
And how
it was
old was
okay.
the rest of the
I was
your
18.
siblings?
My next brother was 16. My
And
next
that is?
brother was 14. Brother Brian, he was 16,
Yeah.
and Weeb was 14,
Yes.
and Luke was 6. So he was 12 years younger than I was.
So there were 6 of you that came over.
6 of us came over, and my dad found a job within a week. So did my brother Brian, because he had already worked as an apprentice in a printing shop. So he found a job here right away. And for me, it took another 2 weeks, and I became a book binder instead of a bookkeeper that I was used to doing.
Yeah.
But that was okay too. I liked my job. I stacked all the books up neatly, and it made me feel good if they were all nice and square and bound properly and so on. Yeah. So I got my bindery woman's ticket. Takes 3 years to apprentice. Worked at Reliable Printing, and for 3 years, and got my ticket. And then I found John, and I got married and quit.
What did you think when you first? Did you land in? Would it have been the east? Where would it be?
We landed in. Well, first of all, we came by boat, which took a week,
Yeah.
and the seas were rough, so most of us were seasick like you wouldn't believe. And the last day when we entered the St. Lawrence River was a good thing because my mom and dad had a 25th wedding anniversary, and so we were treated so royally by the staff and the captain and everything else, and we were all okay. So, because when you're in the St. Lawrence River, you don't get seasick. So that was fun. And then we entered in Quebec. And in Quebec, we thought we were in the wrong country because nobody spoke English.
Yeah.
They spoke French. So we thought, oh no, we're in the wrong country. But we were there for a day and a half, and then we came by train to Edmonton, and that took another week. And I used to call it the cattle train because it was wooden seats that folded out and made it into a bed where you could sleep on.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a little basin with a trickle of water for yourself to wash in.
Yeah.
And when we arrived in Edmonton, we must have looked like some outlandish people, dirty and filthy and grimy and everything, yeah. But
So do you remember what it was like on the train? Was there a feeling of excitement?
Oh yeah,
Was
on the
there-
train was
like,
fun
do you
because,
remember your mom and dad, how they were feeling? Were they kind of...
well, I don't think my mom was very happy. Of course, Dad was the instigator, so he was the boss, right? So he
Yeah.
told us where to go, what to do, and when to go. So, but Mom, they were not that young, you know. They were in their 40s, mid 40s, and which
Yeah.
is not young to immigrate. It's much more difficult to learn a different language. Yeah. So I don't think she was all that happy, but for us it was an opportunity to practice our English, because every single town that we stopped, we'd hang out at the train and we talked to anybody who was walking by, saying, what time is it? What's the name of this town? And then we would feel so proud that we could speak English, you know. That was fun, yeah.
So you came in to Edmonton. That was the destination because
Right.
you had a family that was willing to sponsor you.
Yeah.
Were these cousins or who were
No,
they?
no, they were friends of my mom and dad's.
Okay.
They sang in the same choir and belonged to the same drama group.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you got settled in. Whereabouts in Edmonton did you move?
The West End. Well, we stayed at the immigration hall for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And then there was a couple who found us a house.
Yeah.
And so they were going to show it to us on a Sunday afternoon. I'll never forget it, because we drove by through 102nd Avenue, where all these nice big houses are.
Yes.
And we thought, you know, which house are we going to get? Which house are we going to get? But we kept going and going and going back into Jasper Place.
Yes.
Wooden sidewalks, you know, dirt roads.
Yeah.
And there was our house. It was just a square building
Yeah.
with 4 rooms
Yeah.
and an outhouse. And that was quite a shock.
So was it obviously it was a rental or was just
Yeah,
something that?
yeah, we rented that. We rented it. But since we went to work right away, we pooled all our money, and about 6 months down the road, we bought our second home, and that was bigger, better,
Yeah.
but also flooded.
Now, did you borrow money? Was there
No,
paid cash?
no, we paid cash.
How much?
Well, we paid a down payment.
You paid a down payment.
Yeah, we made a down payment. I can't remember how much it was.
Yeah.
But we made a down payment and made it with all of us together. I remember I was making, at Reliable Printing, I was making $22 a week,
Yeah.
and I had to give $20 of that to my mom and dad, and
Yeah.
I could keep 2. And I smoked a little bit at the time,
Yeah.
and so I bought a package of cigarettes, which cost me $1.50. And as I walked by, what was it again? Army Navy store. I saw a blouse in the window for $1.99. Darn it all! I could have bought that instead of a pack of cigarettes. I never smoked again after that.
Smart lady.
Yeah.
Was that the Army Navy on White Ave?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, on the north
Downtown?
side. On the
Downtown?
north side. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So you learn to do with what you have. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, living in Jasper Place in the mud was quite an experience, because to be able to go to work, I had to take the Diamond bus line, which, and they parked at the end of the street. And so when it was really muddy, and I wore moccasins, my moccasins stayed in the mud, and my bare feet kept going.
Yeah.
So I took my shoes up, and I walked into the bus, you know, with my shoes in my hand, and everybody thought, oh, what's this woman doing? But, and of course, then after we'd been there for a while, my dad got a car, and my brother Brian, he went and took that car quite a bit and got promptly stuck in the ditch, and we had to haul him out again, and you know,
And this is right in Jasper
and this
Place,
is in
before
Jasper
it
Place.
became part of Edmonton.
Yeah, before it became, and if we looked out at the back window in our house, we saw cows and all that, and this was on 154th Street and 95th Avenue. So it has changed an awful lot,
I don't think you see cows in the backyard.
Yeah. And Brother Brian and we got our furniture. That was quite a thing, because we were only allowed to take $200 with us from Holland. So instead of taking the money, well, we of course took that money, but my dad had a business in Holland which he had sold his half of it, and so he decided we would buy all brand new furniture, everything brand new clothes, brand new dishes, brand new furniture. And it all was crated over and shipped over in a crate that was big enough for us to make a porch out of it after we got it. And you should have seen the neighbors coming out when it got unloaded. Because here we were with this Dutch furniture with the carved legs and the red velvet upholstery and buffets and what have you in this little 4-room house. And they could not believe how people that were so rich that they could afford this furniture lived in this little shack of a house. So they all came out and rooted for us, you know. But we found that the Canadians were extremely, extremely helpful. We came in May, and June, July, the gardens started to grow, and our neighbors came over and said, if you want anything out of our garden, you just help yourself. And we thought that was absolutely amazing because we never ever had experienced anything like that. Yeah, so that was kind of neat. And my brother Brian and I, when we got our bikes, we biked downtown to Reliable Printing, which was down McDougall Hill, on our bikes, not knowing that when there is a bus stop, you should really not be biking there because the bus would just throw you on the sidewalk. We learned that in a hurry. And my brother Brian had a horn on his bike, and he embarrassed me to no end because we would be biking through Jasper Avenue, and he would be honking his horn all the time, and everybody would be looking, you know. And no, that wasn't too much fun. But and then going downhill, of course, you could really pick up speed there. And the winters we found extremely cold, extremely cold. And the mosquitoes were bad that year. And being new to mosquitoes, I guess they really loved our blood. And we were just covered in welts. Yeah. So it was quite an experience actually for my mom and dad to come here with 4 kids at the age that they were and just start life anew. And of course, you know, they realized when they left Holland they would never see Holland again, even though, you know, they've been back a few times and so have we.
Yeah.
But at that time it was like you burned all your bridges behind you and that was it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how long was it before you took a trip to, say, the national park, Jasper National Park?
Oh, that didn't take long at all because in 1953 I befriended a person who had a farm, and she had a little Austin, and her and another friend and myself, the 3 girls, we decided we would go to Banff Jasper. And so we were camping with the bears and not paying any attention. They didn't pay any attention to us, and it was absolutely fabulous to go. We were scared though, going through Bayat Hot Springs, because there was just a little dirt road, you know, all the way up. And but we made it okay. We went boating in the Bow River, and I lost my wallet in there, and that was not so nice. But and I just loved the mountains. You know, we all did. We had a lot of fun. That we went for a whole week, and that was fun. Yeah. So it didn't take us long. And then my dad, from church, actually our minister, they owned a cabin at Alberta Beach. So we were invited to go there for a while, and we could stay there for a few days or a weekend or something like that. We used to go horseback riding and did things like that, so that was fun. Except the horses didn't like me. And I didn't know anything about horses. So when we went with the 3 girls, the 3 of us, we rented a horse.
Who were the girls? What are their names?
Anna Marijke and Jenny Fisher. Anna Marijke Tulliken and Jenny Fisher. And
so that would be a Dutch woman?
Yeah.
And an Irishman?
No, they were both Dutch.
Okay.
But Jenny Fisher was born here.
Okay.
And they own a farm, and they were quite well to do.
Yeah.
But so we got on a horse, and my horse wouldn't go anywhere. It just kept nibbling on the grass. And the other 2, they were horsewomen. They all had been on horses, and they were good. And so finally I said, you guys just go. And I said, I'll catch up with you later. So they left me there. And after about half an hour or so, I went very slowly. I saw them coming back. So I thought, oh, now I can turn my horse around and we all go back to the stable. Well, I turned my horse around, and that horse took off for the stable like you wouldn't believe. And I lost my stirrups, and I was hanging around the neck. yelling, "Help, how do you stop this thing?"
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun, yeah. And of course, church was important because we went to the Dutch Reformed Church at the time, and young people, so I sang in the choir and taught Sunday school, and yeah, so we got involved in a lot of things. Because when I got married, both my husband and I, we each had $200, and we got married. No fridge, no washing machine, but we made it. Yeah, bought a fridge. It was the first thing we bought was a fridge, so the milk wouldn't get sour.
How old were you when you were married?
How old was I? I was 21.
So it was 3 years.
3 years. And in Holland, they all thought we were crazy because it took them sometimes 10 years before they finally got married because the housing was so poor there, at that time. Yeah. So, but sometimes I wonder why I'm here, because having had a dad who was part of the resistance, if it wouldn't have been for the Canadian soldiers to liberate us when they did, it was not a matter of when or if we were shot down, but when it would happen, because they got whiff of it, and we had lots of raids on our house during the war. And some soldiers were really mean. They broke all my pictures, for example, knocked holes in the walls, and the next soldier would come and say, "Go to sleep, I will not hurt you." So I was about 11 years old when that happened, and at that time I realized there's good and bad in everybody, and it's so true. Still till today.
So tell me a little bit more about that. Your family helped those in the war. Who did they help, and how did that happen?
My dad, he went and he took Jewish people from one place of Holland to another place to go in hiding, because somehow, I don't know how they found out where they were hiding, but as soon as being in the resistance, they always got the inside information. And so as soon as he got the information, he would pick them up again and move them somewhere else again. And he did that in a milk truck. The milk trucks are like the gasoline trucks that you see here. Those big drums.
Yes.
And they were in there, and that's how he transported them. And he got shot at the dike when he went from one part to the other, because he would not break the seal to open the hatch.
Yes.
Because he said he would get, in trouble because there was milk in there, right? And so of course the Germans didn't believe him, so he got shot at twice actually, and my mom was with him one time too. Yeah. And it was just a scary time, because across the street from us lived a traitor. She was in with the Germans, and we were petrified that she would find out about us. And we also had a radio that we weren't supposed to have. And so one time, Brian's teacher came into my classroom and told me to go and meet my dad right away, because he had blabbed that we had a radio in the coal shed. So, I told my dad, and he went straight home and moved the radio away again, and this is how it went. It was just scary. At first I called it a gopher. If there was going to be a raid, I was supposed to deliver packages of cigarettes to different people, and that was their clue that there was going to be a raid coming up. And one time I had to go and skip rope for about 20 minutes to get to this place where I was supposed to deliver this package. And there were a couple of Jews and a little boy standing by in the middle of the city there, and they were just talking, and all of a sudden I heard rat-a-tat-tat, and I saw the little boy fall down. And I got so scared that I never delivered the package of cigarettes. I turned right around and came home, and I cried the whole day. So my mom gave my dad heck for letting me do these things, and I didn't have to do it again after that. It was just too scary. Yeah. So it was a lot of anxious moments. I had 4 uncles who were all their initials started with a J, and they were all picked up at the same time, because they knew that one of them was the head of some resistance organization, and that was the one they let go the first time. And the other 3, they were tortured. They had the screws on their thumbnails and that, and And also I had an uncle who lived in the southern part, and he was sent to the concentration camp because he was hiding Jewish people. And this whole Jewish family was killed except for one girl. And my aunt later on adopted this girl, and she became our niece. But
And what's her name?
Lucy.
And her last name?
Huisman. And and so my uncle, who was sent to the concentration camp, came out of it, but he died a while later. I mean, he was
from the
torture and everything else, from not eating and distress, all that. So, and that was. But as kids, we weren't really always so scared. We would go to school, for example, and we were not supposed to wear orange, right? I mean, that's the House of Orange.
Right.
And when it was the Queen's birthday, we all had orange behind our lapels. And then we would walk to school and we would pull our lapels up so that you could see the orange, just kind of bluffing it.
Yeah.
But which was not really the thing to do because we could get in trouble that way. But we did it anyway. And but the Germans were also really hard on themselves, because I remember going to school and see them marching in the schoolyard, and if one of them was out of step, boy, did they get hit with a stick. So, they were not easy on themselves either, but they sure were not easy on us either. Towards the end, we weren't supposed to have any lights on after dark, so that the planes up couldn't see any lights. They didn't know where to see them.
1945?
That would have been about 1944, towards the end of 1944. That's when it started. The Germans were losing, and they realized it, and then they got really miserable. And they had to have all of our bikes, so we put wooden rims around the bikes, so they didn't get too interested in having those.
Right.
And I remember one time, all men were called up to go to this square in the city, and they were all standing in line, and then they were interviewed by the Germans, and they were all sent away to either concentration camps or wherever. And my dad was standing next to our doctor, and our doctor said to my dad, "Here, you have my card, because they know me. Just go to the front and tell them you have to do surgery." So my dad was a very brazen person, so he walked right up to front and he says, "I have to do surgery, and it could be one of your fellows that I have to do surgery on, so you better let me go right now." "Okay, go." So he went right away, and he was just so brazen. It was unbelievable. He came back from farmers trying to find some food for us, and on the way back, the Germans got his suitcase full of whatever he got, cheese, milk, whatever there was that the farmers gave him. So he was really upset. So he went to this headquarters, and he said, "I have a family to feed, and you guys better give me my suitcase back, because we cannot live without it." And they were so baffled by the fact that actually one of them dared to go into the hornet's nest, so to speak, that they said, "Oh, just go into the hall there and pick out your suitcase." So of course my dad went in there and picked out the biggest suitcase he could find. And it was, we had a feast. We had cheese, we had milk, we had yarn, wool from sheep's wool that they had put in there, and it was just wonderful. So we got that. So that helped us a lot. And for the rest, towards the end, there was not very much food to be had. So Brian and I, because we were the two oldest, right? We went to the granary, and when they pack up the grain, there's always grain that falls on the ground. So we gathered it all up, put it in a bag, and took it home, and then my mom would pound the dickens out of it, and then she would bake pancakes out of it. Well, if you had one pancake a day, that's all you needed, because it felt like a rock in your stomach. But got us going, so it helped us through it. Yep. There's lots of stories.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I'm probably out of video on
Probably.
this segment, but and we'll give the other two patriarchs an opportunity to speak. But thank you so much.
Be interesting to see what they have to say.
It will, won't it?
Yes.
let's start off with, what are your memories of Holland?
I was only a few months short of my 6th birthday when we came to Canada, so I don't have nearly as much in the way of memories as someone like Yvonne does. What I remember is little snippets here and there. I remember when I was taken on the back of my dad's bicycle to go to the hospital to have my tonsils cut out. It's one of the things I remember. I can remember getting lost one time when I was wandering around, and I found my way home because all of a sudden we passed by my aunt's house and I recognized her little white dog, and that set me on the way home. I can remember that. And I remember crossing the bridge one time over one of the canals. I don't know why I remember that, but it's one of the little snippets. And little things like that. But some details were just lost. I don't remember our house at all, although I do remember falling down the stairs once. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember the details of the house where we lived, or my grandfather's or my father's business or anything like that at all. So I've lost a lot of memory.
So, do you remember much about the actual voyage to Canada?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. And it's one of the things that has helped me to bring back memories is in the last few months I've been corresponding with other people who came on the same boat, on the Sabayak, on the same voyage in 1952. There was also a write-up on the voyage in the Windmill Herald newspaper that a person wrote about the trip. It was a really bad voyage in a way because there was a terrible storm on the Atlantic. It was so bad that there was furniture wrecked and all that sort of thing, and they had to put wood over the portholes of the ship and so on so that they wouldn't break. And almost everyone on board got seasick, including the crew. And I was one of the few who didn't. I've never been seasick or any other kind of motion sickness in my life. So I was spared from that, and very fortunate. One other person who I corresponded with recently also did not get ill, but that was because he had some of those seasick pills with him that he managed to take, and no one else did. But I remember when everyone was down being sick, and I really wanted to go up to the deck to play on the rocking horse that they had up there. So finally my dad relented and took me up there, and it wasn't just a few minutes I was rocking on that rocking horse that he was turning gray and about to barf. So we had to leave again. And so I remember that. And I remember the train coming to Edmonton from Quebec City, the immigrant train. It was quite an old rattle trap, and I can recall when we stopped at one little town that my dad went out off the train to buy a loaf of bread. And the train started taking off when he was still gone, and he had to run to catch the thing, and he just caught it on one of the last cars before it was about to pull out of the station. So yeah. And I remember when we arrived here in Canada, and it was quite an experience because our sponsors came to meet us. We went to the immigrant place where immigrants stay. Then they took us out for a drive around town and took us to a place where they gave me a popsicle. I had never had such a thing in all my life. And I thought that was just the neatest thing. I got to actually eat a popsicle. It was a real treat.
Do you remember what the mood was like with the family? Was it of excitement, adventure, or worry, or what was it?
Well, because adults didn't really talk to kids in those days, I didn't know what was going on, you know. So I just went with the flow, went where we were going. I thought it was a great adventure. I guess Yvonne wasn't very appreciative of the move since she had a boyfriend in Holland and didn't really want to leave.
No.
And I'm not real sure what Brian and Weeb felt, but they probably were a bit apprehensive too. And corresponding with other people who have made the voyage, they often wondered why exactly did their parents decide to come. And in retrospect, they concluded that at least their parents would have been much better off had they stayed in the old country, because the conditions, which were bad at the time that we came, improved soon after. And we entered into a period of fairly decent economic growth. So probably this wasn't the greatest move for them. For me, the most scary thing was going to school after we got here, because I could not speak or understand a word of English, and just be dropped off at school amongst all these other kids and so on, and Sherwood School on 150 3rd Street and 95th Avenue. And it was a very, very scary experience. It didn't stay scary very long. I picked up the language pretty quickly. But for the first few days, it was really frightening.
So what did you expect, or what did you think of Canada? Do you remember what your thoughts were of coming to this strange country, like leaving your homeland and then coming to Canada? Did you have any expectations or what you thought Canada would be like?
I'm not sure that I even knew we were coming to Canada, let alone have any expectations of what Canada would be like.
Yeah, it was just an adventure.
Yeah, that we were coming, that we were immigrating, that we were going to move here permanently. That was all outside my experience. Children were to be seen, not heard, and not talked to back in the day.
So was the primary motive for the move then was economic reasons? Is that what it was back in that would have been 1952?
I don't think so. I think a big factor in the move was my father's desire to get away from his in-laws, who had moved in with us during the Second World War, and whom he did not necessarily get along with. And this was one way of forcing them basically to move into an old age home. I think that was the biggest motivation. Economic things might have been a secondary reason, because I understand that his fruit and vegetable business wasn't necessarily going all that well, and he was having problems with a partner.
So it was something where they could start fresh, brand new, and a change.
Yeah. In the end, it didn't really turn out that well for my father, because he was only here working for, he only worked for 11 years before he got sick, and then another 6 years after that before he died. So never had a chance to really reestablish himself here. I'll tell you some anecdotes about Old Jasper Place when we moved there in '52, because we were only here for a few months before Yvonne had a job, Ryan had a job, we even had a job, and my dad had a job, and they all pooled their money together and made enough down payment to buy their own house.
Right.
On 9502 154th Street. It was an old rattle trap of a house, and Jasper Place was pretty bad in those days. It was just dirt roads, not much gravel on them, open ditches, no sidewalks, no water and sewer. We had a cistern in the basement and a septic tank out back. And so it was pretty primitive compared to what we were living with in Holland, which was, relatively modern. But it was home, and they had to make it home. But the roads were so bad that people would continually get stuck in their cars in the ditch. And not long after, we decided to get a dog. And so we had a dog there, and I would play with the dog a little bit. And one year, the river was really full of swollen, and it rained to beat the band. I think that must have been '54. And the ditches were just chock full of water. So I thought I'd do a little experiment. So I grabbed the dog and threw him in the ditch to see if he could swim. He could, which was a good thing. Yeah. If he'd have drowned, I probably would have really got it.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't anyway. But
So the question I was going to ask is, how is it, from your recollection, did they choose Canada? Why Canada?
they chose Canada for one reason and one reason only, and that was because we could have a sponsor here. You had to be sponsored in order to immigrate, especially since my dad was quite advanced in years for an immigrant. And they had thought of going other places. They thought of South Africa, they thought of Australia, they thought of New Zealand, they thought of the U.S. But then Canada was the option chosen because the Huisman family agreed to sponsor us. So, although they did agree to sponsor us, they also said, don't expect any help once you get here.
Right.
Once you get here, you're on your own, and that's sort of the way it was. And in the end, we didn't really need much help because my dad got a job right away.
Because of?
He got a job right away.
And what did he?
Well, he did odd jobs at first, digging ditches and stuff like that. But soon after, he was hired by Northern Hardware in downtown Edmonton. He was a driver for Northern Hardware for a few years until his back kind of was giving him a lot of problems, and he found he couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Then he got hired on as a caretaker with the public school system in Jasper Place, and that's what he was until the end.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to know what Ryan would have remembered had he been alive here to tell the tale, but unfortunately he's not.
Yeah.
So we'll have to rely on Yvonne and Weeb to fill in the gaps there.
Yes. If you can maybe tell us a little bit about the war years and what you know of with respect to your family's time in Holland.
It's a very interesting question because, of course, Dad never ever spoke about what happened in the war years to any of us kids at all. And in talking to my cousins over in Holland, they had the same experience. Their fathers never talked to them about the war years either. It was just a memory that they wanted left behind. But I did ferret out some information, and I do remember some things. One thing that I really kicked myself for, when Dad died, and you have to remember that I wasn't much more than a snot-nosed teenager at the time that he died. When Dad died, Mom was going through some of his stuff with me. We were the only two people there. And she had this box with some medals in it. And she said, I don't want these. Can I throw them away? I said, well, they're yours. You can do with them what you want. And she said, I don't want to have anything to do with them. And she threw them away. And I'm pretty certain that those were medals that were related to Dad's role in the underground during World War II. You know, I've learned through correspondence with my cousins that all of the Huisman brothers were involved in one way or other in the resistance during the war. One of them, Uncle Yetse, was rather prominent in the underground in Leeuwarden. In fact, he was the head of the resistance in Leeuwarden. And in a book that I obtained, I learned that the resistance in Friesland was the most organized and most well-developed resistance organization in the Netherlands. Now, when the Canadian Army was approaching Leeuwarden, the underground rose up, it says in the book, 5,000 strong, and they managed to actually liberate Leeuwarden themselves. Uncle Yetse and another guy managed to make contact with the Canadian Army via telephone, and they told them that Leeuwarden had been freed and it was safe for the Canadian Army to come in. But they said, please don't take too long and hurry because we're outnumbered. We're afraid that the Germans might retake the city if we don't get some backup. So then the Canadian Army was free to enter Leeuwarden during those days, and to the tremendous cheering of the crowds, many of whom said, we've waited so long to be liberated. We had another uncle who was quite prominent, Uncle Wiebe van der Werf, my mother's brother. He was called up to the army when it appeared that war was imminent and was stationed in a place called Haarlem. When war did break out, he was assigned to the airport at Den Haag. And his job, believe it or not, was to look after the clothing for the soldiers. So he was more or less a clerical person, I guess you could say. But when the Germans started coming over and bombing the airport, the commander of the unit got so scared that he ran away. And everything was in a complete mess, in a real topsy-turvy situation. Nobody knew what they were doing or what they were supposed to do. He actually took charge. He took over as the commanding officer and got everybody in their places doing what they were supposed to do. And at the end of the war, for his heroics, he was awarded a medal from Queen Wilhelmina with Princess Juliana present as well at the palace in Amsterdam. And that is the picture that we have on the wall of our dining room, is of him receiving this medal. He also received a medal from the city of Groningen, which is where he lived. And during the war, he was what they call ducked under, or onderduikt, meaning he was on the run from the Germans and he was continually sabotaging their operations. Now I know that Dad did some of the same sorts of things. Mum talked about him being ducked under in the last days of the war, when the Germans were trying to find all of the Dutch men they could to go and work for them in factories and things, and so a lot of them hid for a while. There were also some stories that I heard from Mom and others, one of them being that he had a milk truck, and he ran the milk truck from the north of Holland to the south with milk in it, and on the way back he would have people who were on the run in the milk truck, whether they be downed airmen or whether they'd be resistance fighters or whatever the Jews, whatever the case might be. And they would stop over and at our house in Leeuwarden, but not for very long, because our house wasn't a safe house. But from there they would be ferried off to hiding places in Friesland, which was a farming province, sparsely communicated, lots of places to hide. So he did that during the war years. On one trip, he very nearly got killed, not by the Germans, but by the Allies. He was part of a convoy, and I guess the Allies took it to be a German military convoy, and when the planes went over, they dived down and strafed the convoy. And he jumped out of his truck and hid in the ditch, but neither he nor his truck were hit, fortunately. So that was a close call. On another occasion, apparently, and this is when his truck was empty, he accidentally ran over, in a traffic accident, a German woman on a bicycle, and she died. They stuck him in jail, and it could have been very bad for them. But it was the Queen's birthday coming up, and the Germans, in an attempt to make nice to the Dutch in those days, maintained a tradition where that they would actually release a prisoner in honor of the Queen's birthday. And my dad happened to be the one that was released. So that was another place where he very nearly caught it. So those are my memories and what I've since learned about the war years.
Well, it seems like in talking with Weeb and Yvonne that there's been a number of close calls, many of them associated with this milk truck going through German lines. I think both Yvonne and Weeb talk about a story which maybe is the same story, where Yvonne points out that she had heard reports of her dad speaking of being shot at, and of the milk truck being shot at as they went through German lines when there were Jews in the milk truck. And Weeb spoke of a time, which may have been the same time, or perhaps a different one, where his dad got him to get down on the floor as shots were being fired at the truck. So with all of this going on, it seems a bit miraculous that your dad actually made it through the war alive, being right in the thick of the resistance and taking grave risk to do ultimately what he felt was right and important and humane and necessary.
Yes.
To help others.
Yeah. And most of the Huisman brothers did escape the war unscathed physically, but certainly damaged mentally. Yvonne talks about how she thinks that it was probably in that uprising when Leeuwarden was being liberated that she saw Dad coming out of the basement with his gas mask on and a rifle and all that kind of stuff. And that's when the resistance rose up and freed the city. And she thinks that's when he killed somebody. And she says he was never the same after. Now, of course, I didn't know him before, so I don't know what he was like before. But I can well believe that when you take someone's life, that it does something to you. One other uncle didn't fare very well at all in the war. That's the one I was named after, Uncle Luke. He did hide Jews in his house, and unfortunately he was caught out and sent to a concentration camp. And he spent the rest of the war in a concentration camp. When he got out of the concentration camp, came home, but he was deathly sick from what he would have contracted there, and just a few months later he died. So he was the one that was, he was the oldest son, and he was the one that was the most personally affected by it.
How many brothers did your father have?
He came from a family of 8 brothers and 2 sisters.
And were they all involved? Were they all alive during this wartime period?
They were. They were all alive. Uncle Yetsa was the youngest, actually. And he would have been 36 or something like that by the end of the year. By the end of the war, I should say. Dad was 40.
And were most of the family involved in the underground efforts?
Yes. It was well known that they were, or at least well known amongst the loyal Dutch people. One of the problems that the Germans had in trying to deal with the Huisman brothers is that they couldn't tell them apart because they looked so much the same. And so when they were trying to catch one of them, they would never really know for sure as to which one it was they were going after. And they couldn't very well round up the whole tribe. although apparently they did at one point, and they were questioning all of the Huismans whose name began with J. Uncle Jan, Uncle Johan, Uncle Jetze, Uncle Jakob, and trying to find out which one of them was responsible for something that they knew was the responsibility of a J. Huisman.
Do you recall what that was?
No, I don't know what that was. But apparently they questioned them all, and they used thumb screws and little wonderful devices like that to try and get them to talk. But from what I understand, the one who knew what it was all about was Uncle Jetze. They let him go first for some reason, and kept talking to the others who didn't necessarily know anything. Another difficulty is that there was another couple of tribes of Huismans living in the same city, in Leeuwarden at that time, who were more distant cousins, like second, third, fourth cousins to my family. So they also had Johans and Jacobs and all these other family names that continue on through the generations. And trying to separate one from the other would be very difficult.
So the war ended when? In 45? Or when?
Yes, the war ended in April 1945.
And how many Huisman brothers and sisters were still alive at that point?
They were still all alive, all 8 brothers and 2 sisters. My Uncle Luke didn't die until a few months after.
And those were, we feel that was from those experiences in the war?
Yes. Yes.
Physical and emotional torture or mental torture?
From having been in the concentration camp, from what he contracted in the concentration camp.
Yeah. And how, of the brothers and sisters, was it just your father's family that came to Canada?
My father's family and one sister and her family also came to Canada.
Who was she?
And that was Aunt Tante Trein, or Aunt Catherine as she was called here in Canada, and her husband Hessel Velema. They came a couple years after we did, and they stayed in Edmonton, and Uncle Hessel died here. All of their children wound up moving to California in the Los Angeles area, and they are still there to this day. And Aunt Catherine actually died in California while she was visiting them.
And do you have any communication with that family?
Not with that family, no, I don't. I have communication with some of Uncle Jetze's family back in Holland, and I have communication with Uncle Weeve's family back in Holland, but I don't have anything with any Huisman family here in Canada or the States.
Well, before that.
Well, because my hobbies include genealogy and history, I've done a lot of digging over the last 20 years or so to find out exactly where the family came from and what their antecedents were and so on and so forth. They actually did not originate in Friesland. The Huisman family originated in the province of Overijssel, which is a neighboring province. And the reason why they came to Friesland, actually, is because they were involved in the peat moss trade, and there had been a major flood in Overijssel, in the town of Bulik, where they lived, and the entire town was inundated and disappeared in the flood. So they then moved to Friesland, where there were also peat moss operations, and for all of the generations down to my grandfather, they were all involved as peat moss harvesters and that sort of thing, common laborers, if you like. And that trade went down to my grandfather and his father, who were involved in selling peat moss off barges that they ran up and down the canals of Europe. That was how they made their living. I even have a picture now of a boat that was one of the family boats that was involved in the trade up and down the canals, which is kind of interesting. But there are no great heroes or famous politicians or anything like that back in my family. Once they moved to Friesland, they all intermarried with Frisian ladies, which I assume is why my father and all of his brothers looked so Frisian. I mean, they were black hair, brown eyes, swarthy complexions, typical Frisians, not blue-eyed, blonde-haired Dutch people, such as we are. I mean, we tend to take, I guess, after my mother, because she was a redhead and blue eyes and, fair complexion, that sort of thing. So in her family, in the Van der Werf family, they originated in Friesland as far back as I can tell, but obviously because of the skin features and so on, there were Dutch people in there somewhere, and their physical characteristics went down the line to her family. There were no black-haired, brown-eyed people in that one.
So what years would, or centuries, would they be being involved in the peat moss agriculture?
Right back from the late 1600s, right up to 1940s.
Oh.
So, they were involved in that trade for a very, very long time. I'm not sure whether that's typical or not of the era of people, whether families just automatically went into the trade of their parents. I suspect it probably is.
Okay, so I spoke with Yvonne and I
Yes.
spoke with Luke, and we've talked a little bit about their versions, of course, of what Holland was like. Now, Luke didn't remember much at all. And a little bit about the trip, a little bit about Canada. I heard that Canada was one of 5 potential choices.
Correct?
And now I understand it was South Africa, New Zealand,
That was-
Australia, United States,
Yeah.
and then Canada.
From what I could gather, we were accepted at one time in South Africa, and then it was declined. So after, the way I remember it, Dad sold his wholesale in fruit and vegetables first, before we left. Then he was declined. So we had to scurry around to find a place to go to. And Canada was the the last resort, so to speak.
So what was the impetus for the move?
Since World War II, nothing seemed to go too well in Holland. Dad, he told me once, he said, every year I got to put more money into the business. So the economy was not doing too well. So, and then Yvonne and Brian, my oldest brother, who passed away, they decided, well, we're not going to stay here. We're going to go find a new life in a different country. So Dad says, rather than split the whole family up, let's all go together. So he took the bull by the horn, and we did. And he said, because when you're a business owner, you don't have any holidays, So he says, let's take the boat to Canada. That was a miraculous trip, at least most of it. We were all seasick, except my dad. My dad never got seasick. But my mother got seasick when the boat was still tied on the docks at Rotterdam. And she didn't get out of bed till we hit the St. Lawrence Seaway, the day we docked in Quebec City. So it was a tough time for her. But for us, it was okay, so you're seasick for a day or two.
Yeah.
That wasn't too bad, although we were right in the front of the boat, and all the bunks were 3 deep. So pity the guy at the bottom when everybody's seasick. I mean, you don't want to be there.
Yeah.
The smell was horrendous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Brian playing ping pong by himself on the boat, slow motion. But every time the boat tipped up, the ball would come back to him. You see, and he'd hit it again. He had it down pat,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was good.
Yeah.
Then we came here, of course, and then we took the steam train
Yes.
from Quebec City to Edmonton, and that was a whole new experience because we've never seen this country. Oh, by the way, when we went in the St. Lawrence Seaway, we said, "Oh, look at these people on the shores. They're so clean." Because we were so used to Mom putting the laundry out on the lawn and on the wash lines to dry. We didn't have these automatic machines. So the thing is that we thought they had all the laundry laying out on the lawns. Mm-hmm. Little did we know there was still snow. It was snow. We thought it was the laundry drying out in the sunshine. So, yeah. So then we took the train, and we were in the second last car. The last car was the Italians, and the smell out of that Italian car was horrendous. They did their own cooking. Every car had their own little potbelly stove. I don't know what they burned there. They could have burned the food for all I know, but the smell was horrendous from the Italian car. We didn't want to get close to it. But then we have to supply our own food, you see. But every time the train stopped, some of the gentlemen would jump out, go to a little store and buy some bread or milk or whatever. And there was one time when Dad almost missed the boat, the train. The train started rolling already, and he wasn't on board yet. And I saw him, 3 gentlemen run with a sack of groceries. And you know, we weren't sure whether he was going to make it. We all encouraged him. You know, you see in the movies these things.
Yeah.
Finally, he grabbed on to the handle there, and he came on board. But the thing was, it was a warm trip. We've never been in a country where they had tunnels. So when you have a steam train and you go through tunnels, you know, we had all the windows open, of course. So all that soot would come right into the wagons and really felt like Negroes. You know, we looked real dirty.
Yeah.
But we ended up in Edmonton with, I believe Dad said we had $32 altogether with the 6 of us, each with a suitcase. That was it. And, still, you know, we learned how to speak Dutch, how to speak English in Holland, except for me, because I thought the language was so funny. Every time they said something that sounded dumb to me, it sounded stupid,
Yes.
I burst out laughing.
Yes.
So finally, Dad says, no more lessons for you, boy, you go upstairs.
Yes.
So I wasn't allowed to be in with a teaching session about English language.
Yeah.
So I knew 2 words, yes and no, but I didn't know which one to use because I couldn't figure out what the question was. Okay? But when in Rome, do like the Romans do, and you learn the language quite fast.
Yes. So who spoke English the best?
Yvonne. I mean, she went to college or whatever it was called in Holland,
Yeah.
and she had an office job where you had, excuse me, where you had to learn French, German, and English,
Yeah.
as well as Dutch.
Okay.
So she was quite. She thought she was real good at it.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, she was able to get by with it.
So do you remember the whole voyage, like what it was like for the family? Like, was it anticipation? Was it excitement? Was it
Excitement for us kids. I was 14 when I came. I thought it was great, you know, see new things and do new things, and go to a whole new country. I mean, there was nothing in Holland that interested me.
Yeah.
You know, it really wasn't. And I've never gone back either.
You have never been back?
I never wanted to go back.
Yvonne's been back? Once or twice? Or?
Yeah, I don't know how many times.
Yeah. And
Luke hasn't been there
Luke
either,
hasn't
I
been
don't
back?
think.
I never asked.
But he was so young, you know.
Yeah.
He's 8 years younger than me, so
Yeah.
he was 6 when he came.
Yeah.
So, you know, what memories would he have to go back to?
Yes.
Now, when I go on the computer, I can Google the address where I used to live in Holland.
Yeah.
But to go back, why would I go back and look at a building that was there 60 years ago? It doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
Now, my wife Sandra, she always wanted to go and find out where I came from. And I said, someday when I retire again, I'll think about it.
Yeah.
I didn't say outright no,
Yeah.
but I never had a desire to go back.
Yeah.
I mean, this is God's country as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
You know, and the Lord has blessed us royally here. What is there in Holland? All my aunts and uncles have passed away. Cousins I never knew.
Yeah.
Some cousins I didn't want to know.
Yeah.
They were stuck up.
Yeah.
And so, you know, whereas Luke a little bit, but Yvonne kept up with cousins up to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So that's pretty well Holland as far as I'm concerned.
Do you remember much of the war? Like I've talked to Yvonne a little bit, and she shared with me some of the stories about your father with the milk truck, about transferring
Yes.
the Jewish peoples to different places, and
Parking
then
in front
being
of-
in fear of the Gestapo and of the Nazis
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
What are your memories of that, or maybe share something that?
Well, Brian and I, we were the brave boys, you see. And I remember with our little fishing rods, there was a German truck on there. Like we were right, our house was it's row housing. Our house was next to an alley. I call it an alley. And there was a German truck there. They had bread piled in the back of the truck, and we were out of the second story window with our fishing rods trying to see if we could snag a loaf. Of course, it didn't work because they weren't bagged, you see. So how do you get a loaf of bread? But I remember when Dad parked the truck in front of the house, and all of a sudden, this is the milk tank. All of a sudden, that little lid on top popped open, and somebody peered out. That was a no-no.
Yeah.
Nobody was supposed to know about that.
Yes.
But I still remember the day when the Canadians came into our city. I know it's the exact spot where I was standing. There was really something spectacular. I didn't know the first thing about war. I mean, what do I know? I know we had Jews up on the rafters, and apparently they were caught. Somebody tattled on them. Apparently it was a Jewish girl that befriended a German SS officer, and so they were caught. But, you know, when you're that age, you don't know really much about wars, you know. So people get killed. I mean, what do you know about life and death? You don't know the half of it. But it was such a memorable occasion when you saw the tanks come into our town, you know. And we are, from what I could gather, we're the only town in Holland that got rid of all the Germans ourselves. My dad was quite well versed in the underground, and they did a lot of work to get rid of the Germans. And so in the last days, there were no Germans left when the Canadians came in. So there was no fighting. That's pretty well all I remember from Holland.
What's the name of the town?
Leeuwarden. And we were standing on the corner of, I don't know the one street, but Groningen Straatweg. That's the road that goes from Leeuwarden to Groningen, the next city in the next province, the capital city in the next province, Groningen. And so they came in over that highway, and I remember that. And everybody was shouting and jumping. Yeah.
That was kind of a sign of the end.
That was the end, really, as far as we were concerned. So, I mean, that's the only thing I remember about the war, as far as that goes. I know Dad took me one time with his truck to south of Holland, South Holland,
Yeah.
where he picked up a load of vegetables and trucked them back to North Holland. And you know, there's a road going from North Holland to Friesland. I don't know how well versed you are with Holland, but there's that dike that used to go across the IJsselmeer at that time. Now it's all farmland. They all drained it all and made farmland out of it. But at that time it was quite a stretch of highway. I don't know how many miles. Right across the water. And the Germans had a station there, and apparently we were stopped there. And at one point, Dad pushed me to the floor and stepped on the gas. And from what I could gather, shots were fired, and the Germans had fallen off the back of the truck. They were going to take the load off the truck, and Dad just took off and got back home safe and sound. But you know, when you talk about Holland, yeah, I was born there, but that's about it. I had no real memories there. We were in Boy Scouts. I remember one day we came upon a bunker which had a lot of life grenades and other fancy toys that we started to play with until somebody tattled and told us to leave them alone. I mean, what do we know about these things, you know?
Yeah.
But one day, my mother was giving me a bath in the living room, the warmest room in the house. Only one stove was on, and the only room that was decently warm. And we saw the airplanes coming overhead, and just to the west of us was a gas plant. You had these big tanks you see in Edmonton, just on the outskirts on the east side, the big tanks. And I figured they were firing on these tanks. But the one plane in particular, he came a little too low, and he couldn't get out of his dive, and dove into the backyard about a block and a half behind our house. That was kind of a scary time. Another thing I remember, my dad coming out of the coal cellar. It wasn't really much of a coal cellar, just a hole underneath the stairs. That was the coolest place in the house. And he came out with his gas mask on, and for a young kid, you know, he had his gun, and had a belt with all these grenades on it. And that's how he came out of that cell, and I thought he was a monster, you know. I screamed, "Mom, help me!" So, but you know, you remember some of these things, but
Yeah.
and you can always fantasize.
Well, you would have been 10 or 12, but
We left in '52, so I was 14. I was 7. You know, at that time when the war ended. 45.
yeah. So just snippets of
Yeah,
pieces.
I can tell you tales about it.
Yeah.
That I'm sure if you pass it by Luke or Yvonne, they'd say, none of that is true.
Yeah.
You know, I could dream about it, but I started writing a book a while back about all the happenings that I remember from the time actually I met Sandra, and then you go on rabbit trails to past history, you know, and I have all sorts of tales to tell. And then of course I did a stupid thing. I'm no computer expert, and I hit the wrong button and I lost the whole thing. I had 46 chapters written.
Oh no.
Yeah. So someday when I have time, I'll start it again.
Yeah.
But you know, as I started that book, I said, look, the stories I'm telling is to the best of my knowledge. It may not be the whole truth,
Well, and that's how you remember it.
but this is how I remember it. And if I go overboard with my stories, if I stretch things too far, well, so be it.
Yeah.
This is what I remember, and if you don't like it, well, don't accept it. Just enjoy what you read.
Yeah.
But at least I've told you some things that have happened during my lifetime. But you know, there's some things I can say that it was a good thing we left Holland, because we've been blessed in Canada.
Yeah.
You know, sure, when we came here, we had nothing. The furniture didn't arrive till, I believe, 7 months after we arrived, so we live in ground level.
Yeah.
You know, we had an apple box for a table.
Yeah.
We had sleeping bags and all these kind of things. And so it was Gumbo City, Jasper Place, Gumbo City. I remember the RCMP get stuck, and Mom just took him in, spent the night at our place on the floor with the rest of us, and the following day he went on his way. I also seen a team of horses delivering horse meat door to door. Got stuck. The horses couldn't get through. And Yvonne, being the oldest, he got a job in a print shop,
Yeah.
and Brian too. And quite often I had to walk with them to the bus stop at the end of the block.
Yeah.
Then they would put their shoes on, and I got to carry the filthy boots home,
Yeah.
because they couldn't carry them downtown because it was full of mud, you know.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we had some good times.
Okay. So A couple things that I want to just go over briefly is Brian's not here.
No, unfortunately.
Is there some things that maybe you think he would have shared if he was sitting in your chair that maybe you could speak for him?
Brian, Luke was 8 years younger than myself. Brian was 2 years older. And then you have my sister, 2 years older than Brian. So Brian and I got along very well. And we did a lot of things together. But he was always the instigator of everything that was done. Whether it was showing off or whatever it was, jumping in the ditches. We had some cousins over at the house. They came over from Holland, and they were really up there, And so Brian says, "I bet you I can jump over that ditch." The ditch was full of water, right just outside the house. No, you can't. This was after church, so we all had our Sunday clothes on. Well, Brian always jumped across it and never no problem till this time. His foot slipped and he fell in the middle of the ditch. Great delight of all my cousins, of course, that didn't like him. Another time, Halloween, we moved the outhouse just far enough away for people to jump in, visit the hole. But he was the one that slipped in. Nobody else slipped in. He did. Things like that. He would take Dad's car, unbeknownst to Dad, and we'd take it down at the end of 156th Street and go towards the golf course, and there was a valley there in winter time, and he couldn't make it up the hill, couldn't get out of the valley. So we were at the bottom, and we didn't know what to do, so we walked to the closest farmhouse, and we asked the farmer if he could get us out. He came with the tractor and tried to pull us out. He couldn't make it up the hill either. It was all ice. So I got a team of horses, and they were able to get everybody out. But needless to say, we didn't come home till well after midnight. And then the fight was on, of course. Dad and Brian was always button heads. They couldn't miss. Dad would tell him what to do, he'd go right against it. He'd say, "No way." So he was the first one to leave the house. I mean, Yvonne was the first one, of course. But Brian was a jovial guy. He always had a great sense of humor. Came out at church was ended one time, and Yvonne says, "I like that guy standing over there. His name is John. Why don't you invite him home for lunch, for dinner, and so I can meet him?" Now, she figured he'd say, "Why don't you come over to our place for lunch? We'd like to meet with you, get acquainted." But no, he said, "Hey, John, Yvonne says she would like you to come over to the house so she can investigate what you're about," that type of thing. So, yeah, I mean, he always had a great sense of humor. I mean, he was such a. They named a street after him. It's called the Huisman Crescent out in Hinton, because of the work that he did with the town council in Hinton. And he's still remembered by some of the people that live there. Yeah, it was such a joy. I had so much fun with him.
Yeah.
Sometimes we take a sailboat or a rowboat.
Yeah.
And make a homemade sail. We have a blanket and an old tree, and we put a blanket across there, and then we go right across the Lake Wubman. And then we didn't have the energy to row back because the wind was the other way.
Yeah.
So Brian would get out of the boat and he'd hitchhike back into town, rent a power boat, go back to get us back in.
Yeah.
All kinds of things like that, I remember we went fishing one day. Since we didn't have much money, we always got a rowboat that had a hole in it. So, I mean, it wasn't for the fish that we went. We went for the outing, And so we did a lot of bailing. He always bailed out. But one day, he had a big boulder, and he tied a rope on it as an anchor. We were both in Boy Scouts, so we know what kind of knots to make in that thing. So he says, wait, he says, throw the anchor in the boat and let's go. Well, I took it and I heaved it in the boat and went right through the boat. And right where Brian was standing there, it went down, down, down. No more boat.
Oh, that's hilarious.
You know, there's all kinds of fun stories.
Yeah.
I remember when I married Sandra. Now Sandra came up from Memphis, Tennessee. First place we hit after we arrived in Edmonton, the first visit we made was to Hinton to visit Brian and Alice. And we sat there that night and we laughed till about 3 o'clock in the morning. He would tell one story after another. It was just such a joy. We'll never forget that, you know. We had this old converted school bus, went to the lake, and on the way to the lake, going from Hinton to Jasper, Alice would get us all singing the old songs from Holland. I don't remember the songs, but you remember the tune.
Yeah.
You know, so we were all howling with laughter and always had a great time. We really miss him.
Yeah.
But so yeah.
I guess just to wrap up then, you had that, you said 48 pages.
I did.
Can you share with us
Chapters.
one story from that book that we haven't talked about?
Well, let's see. I remember when I wanted to visit my brother. He was living in Fort St. John at that time. Brian was living there. And Yvonne was coming with me. And on the way down there, it's, you know, a great stretch of road was all gravel. And when they fill the potholes, they take boulders and they put a boulder in the pothole. So it's very rough terrain. But there was a stretch when it was just like a washboard. You ever had that?
Yeah.
Just like a washboard.
Yeah.
And Yvonne had to go to the bathroom so bad. And then we went over this washboard road for miles on end. And the more we went over these boards, the more she needed to go. Couldn't do anything about it. Well, finally we made it past that. But then we went to the dam. I forget the name of the dam, just outside Fort St. John. Coming back, a rock went through the gas tank. So Brian says, no problem. And he put out a big pack of bubble gum. Yeah, he says, everybody chew bubble gum. So we all chew bubble gum. He said, okay, we'll pack it together. He got under the car and the gas was running out quite freely. And he just plugged it up with his bubble gum. And we got back to Fort St. John, only one piece. Things like that, you know.
Yeah.
They're fun stories.
Yeah.
I only remember the fun things. There's been days when life wasn't all roses.
Yeah.
No, we've had our tough times.
Yeah.
The Lord always picked us up and got us back out of it. It's not, I always say it's not what you go through, it's how you come through it. You know? And I remember when my first wife, she passed away with cancer. She was in one hospital dying of cancer, and I had two of my children in, forget what hospital, in the West End here, with asthma, and my oldest, Patty, she was home with the flu. And I was trying to keep everything together, you know, and it was a tough time. But that's when I learned you don't look at it as a problem, you look at it as a challenge. When you look at it as a challenge, you can go through anything.
There are no problems.
So then, as far as I'm concerned, life is a blast when you have your mind in the right places. You really do. We've grown to love the Lord here, and we see miracles happen day and night. Well, I shouldn't say day and night, but weekly we see miracles happening, and it's a joy to be alive. We don't take it lightly, because I almost lost Sandra three or four times. It's heart disease, and I had a bout with cancer, and so you know, you call it a precious time when you're together.
Yes.
And you can live life to the fullest. And we do. We help people every day of the week. We help somebody because that's what I do. I get people out of debt, and I help them reach a good income. You know, that's our lifestyle, helping people. We've always done it. My parents did it back in Holland. They did it here in Canada. We just followed on with it. If somebody needs something, well, what do? You help them out. I don't know what else I can tell you about it.
It's fantastic. You've shared so much. Thank you.
A real pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.